Hello and welcome to all the men and women of the West. I'm Joe, here with me is my co-host Dan.
Hello and greetings.
We're back, baby, with another Silmarillion podcast. Last time on Of the Return of the Noldor, we had Fëanor kind of kicking the bucket and the bucket coming back to him with a few Balrogs in order to put an end to him. Okay, now that the recap's done, the chapter continues with the sons of Fëanor being sent an embassy by Morgoth, who decides to pretend to acknowledge defeat, offers terms, and even suggests that he might be willing to surrender a Silmaril. It is Maethros who decides, as the eldest son, he's in command, and tells his brothers that it might be wise to treat with Morgoth. What's interesting is the language Tolkien uses. Maethros does not command, but persuades. He does not have the authority or the authoritative presence to force his brothers to do what he wants. This in itself shows he is nowhere near as formidable or as respected as Fëanor, at least in the eyes of his brothers. As we will see in the next couple of tales of the Silmarillion, he certainly is, in some ways, a match for the greatness of Fëanor, or at least almost is. And it's as we commented in our team up with Girl Next Gondor, tall in French translates as grand, which also translates back into English as great. So Maethros the Great. Indeed. But at present, he's still trying to cement his authority over his brothers. So he has to persuade them, which is a massive climb down from his father's position. But his father did a lot to undermine the authority and dignity of Maethros in front of the younger brothers. And the reason I say that is when Maethros begged for Fingon to come with them and for them not to burn the boats, Fëanor basically laughed in his face. So Maethros was shown to be a futile weakling. Not that he is, but that's probably how some of his brothers perceived him to be. What makes things worse is that when the embassy comes about, you have Maethros who's ambushed and all his company are slain. Now, this means that his brothers were coming in from a distance. They weren't with him personally. Or that they withdrew as he was left to fight on his own. Which, the problem is, in either case, shows that they didn't fight for him. Even Maglor, the heroic brother, did not fight for Maethros, which really puts a damper on how heroic we might perceive Maglor. Brings into question their honor. These are not good kids. They did not have the courage to try to fight for their brother. They instead immediately drew back and fortified a great camp in Hithlum. Morgoth holds Maethros hostage and informs the Noldor that he would not release him unless the Noldor would forsake their war, go back west, or else depart far from Beleriand and into the south of the world. The Fëanorians know that Morgoth would just stab them in the back and would never release Maethros. And they're also constrained by their oath to retake the Silmarils. So they do nothing. One can imagine the arguments probably taking place in the camp, and one can imagine that they're unsure of what to do. If they actually risk Maethros' life, they risk losing their own authority over their own factions. Ergo, they're in a pickle. Maethros, though, is certainly in far worse condition because he's hung from the face of a precipice on Thangorodrim by his right wrist. And it's contained in a band of steel. Now, steel is forged with a lot of iron in it. So there's a nod here to traditional Fey lore, wherein fairies are very weak and susceptible to iron. So steel's very useful against fairies. Rumor reaches the camp in Hithlum of the arrival of Fingolfin, as Fingolfin and his followers have just finished crossing the Helgaraxe, and everybody's basically going, "What? You guys are alive? Wow, who saw that one coming?" Of course, you have two characters from Sinbad going, "Pay up, they're still alive." Or at least the elvish versions of them are saying that to each other. They also end up kind of staring in wonder at the coming of the moon. But as Fingolfin sets foot into Mithrim, the sun rises in the distant west, at which point Fingolfin unfurls his blue and silver banner and blows his war horns. And here's the interesting thing. Flowers spring up wherever his feet touch. Now, this is something that would later be used by Princess Mononoke with the Spirit of the Forest. It has to be recognized. Fingolfin had it first. This puts Fingolfin, in terms of, I guess you could say, power level, way over 9,000, way over any of the elves of Tolkien's world, over even the likes of Ecthelion and Glorfindel, because literally flowers spring up wherever he sets foot. Fingolfin is almost in the Greek sense, a god of Olympus, or some sort of demigod, as this flower thing is reminiscent also of Dionysus and Demeter. There's something very potent that Tolkien is doing here. We are meant to imagine him as a figure of fertility, life-giving, and generally a potent force on a par with some Maiar. Actually, if one thinks about it, not even Gandalf tends to have this effect. Where does that put Fingolfin's power? Even Gandalf the White doesn't do this. And it's just slipped in there as a minor addendum.
Minor addendum or not,
it does showcase that there's something uncanny about Fingolfin. He never diminished his force like Feanor did by pouring his essence into objects like the Silmarils or the Palantirs. So he still has all of his potent force. Honestly, he might just be the most powerful elf in Tolkien's Legendarium, in just raw power. The flower thing is unusual. I've never heard of any elf in this literature doing that, and yet he does. Fingolfin may also be more powerful than Fingal. This is unusual. Why did Tolkien give him the flower-growing power? It can't be because Tolkien was a hippie, because he actually scorned the hippie movement. Is an unusual decision. This has more in common with messianic characters in literature, and even fertility goddesses and fertility gods, than just chivalric knights or kings. At the same time, it's a good nod to King Arthur and other kingly archetypal characters in Celtic mythology in particular, as King Arthur was said to have restored greenness and harvest and fertility to the land after bringing back the Cauldron of Ceridwen, or the Holy Grail in the Christian variants of the myths. Is that how we're supposed to perceive Fingolfin? And if anyone thinks I'm obsessing about this detail, it's because it's worth obsessing about. And the following part says, "And the ages of the stars were ended." It's good to know that the ages of the stars does not end with the rising of the sun, but rather the unfurling of the war banners of Fingolfin's host. So one age ends as Fingolfin declares war upon Morgoth. Now, at the rising of the first sunrise, of course, the servants of Morgoth decide, "Run away!" and flee back to Angband, at which point Fingolfin just pours over with his host through all of Dor Daedaloth and just strikes the gates of Angband before withdrawing. Sadly for Maethros, he hears them amid his torment and tries to cry out to them, but apparently his voice is lost as they're banging on the gates because they can't hear him. Imagine being Maethros, you're hanging by your wrist on iron, which in some fashion, and you're screaming. It would probably hurt to also be hanging there from the raw rock, as it probably scratches your back, and you're screaming. You could hear your possible rescuers a short distance, and you're screaming for help, but they never hear you. And ironically, he's the only one of the sons to have actually behaved himself every step of the way up till now like a real champ, for the most part, just trying to do the right thing and honor his father and grandfather, trying to also restrain his dad and brothers from going full cuckoo. His reward? Hanging from Thangorodrim to be tantalized with possible rescue. Fingolfin, for his part, decides discretion is the better part of valor and not to push things, so withdraws. Naturally, gives Morgoth the chance to recover and go, ooh. Now, the reason Fingolfin draws back is because he thinks, I'm not going to push my luck. Morgoth's got a trick of some sort in there, and we're not yet ready to fight him. What if the Feanorians hit me from behind? Strong possibility there. So in that regard, Fingolfin doesn't have much choice. He has to withdraw. And the reality is that it's said on page 99 of the hardcover edition, "No love was there in the hearts of those that followed Fingolfin for the house of Feanor, for the agony of those that endured the crossing of the ice had been great. And Fingolfin held the sons the accomplices of their father." They come within an inch of declaring civil war. That said, many of Feanor's followers repent of the burning at Losgar. They did want to make peace, but they're kind of ashamed of what they did. And they should be. Fingon, the eldest son of Fingolfin, decides the rift between the House of Fingolfin and the House of Feanor has to be put to an end. It has to be done before the enemy can strike. So he decides he would hurry off on his own, that he's going to go climb the mountain, visit his chum, Maethros. And unable to find Maethros, this is where it's really interesting, brings along with him a harp, of all the things to bring along. I don't know, you could have brought a mountain climbing kit. Instead, you bring your harp. He actually brought it in case he needed to locate Maethros and couldn't find him. Fingon can be a clever little dog. I really love why he brought the harp. He starts singing, probably something like "Can You Feel the Love Tonight" or something. No, wait, it would be "Out of the Blue" by Elton John, because that's a great song about friendship and whatnot. I'm just saying. Sings. The song is taken up with Maethros singing amid his torment. Maethros ends up begging to be put out of his misery. Fingon strings up an arrow. He cries out to Manwë, humiliating himself here because the Noldor have sinned, even against Manwë. Even Fingon did. But he humiliates himself and abases himself before Manwë, saying, "O king to whom all birds are dear, speed now this feathered shaft, and recall some pity for the Noldor in their need." Now, Tolkien was a lifelong Catholic. Main philosophical virtue that he tries to kind of teach in his literature is humility. And this is where it is a marked contrast to, say, Howard, where it's valor that is preached. Fingon humiliates himself and lowers himself before Manwë. Salvation comes. Tolkien's doing something very deliberate there in the literature, kind of subtly teaching and trying to demonstrate the importance of abasing yourself before, in this case, God, before your betters, that you should not cling unduly to your pride. What do you think of this scene?
Humility is probably a very difficult virtue to achieve because it's not just a matter of acknowledging you might be wrong in a conversation.
The antithesis to narcissism.
Exactly.
Very difficult in this day and age as we live in the age of narcissism and Instagram. And to any Instagram models out there, I mean every offense. But of course, humility comes easily to me. If you understand the joke there, you get a cookie. Manwë decides, okay, these two Noldor have suffered enough. So he calls upon Thorondor, who was apparently the largest bird in the Legendarium, being the largest walking, flying KFC dinner. Thorondor has a wingspan of 55 meters. That is huge. Your average eagle has a wingspan at most of 2.3 meters. This barbecue is humongous.
This delicious turkey could probably feed an entire kingdom for several years.
Yeah, or a single French village for about a week. I'm just saying, because the French love to eat. Anyways, Thorondor the barbecue, the deep fried chicken, comes to the rescue of Fingon and Maethros. Now, if anyone took offense at our jokes about Thorondor, we meant every word here. Lighten up. Besides, American Thanksgiving's around the corner. You have to think about turkey and dinner, especially Fingon trying to break the band of iron, but being unable to. Maethros, being in pain, begs Fingon just to end it. This is horrible, this is torture. And Fingon cuts off his hand, or at least from the wrist, and they bear Maethros back to Mithrin. Maethros is nurtured back to health, and it's even commented that over the course of the next few years, he lives to wield his sword with his left hand better than with his right. Maethros, it has to be acknowledged, was the best warrior of the House of Fëanor. And Fingon wins great renown. Legitimately so. The hatred between the two houses temporarily assuaged. Avec Maethros deciding to beg forgiveness for the desertion in Araman, he even does one thing in a show of humility, for which, sadly, he would never be fully rewarded, as the good guys don't always win in Middle-earth and the Hyborian Age. The truth is, he ends up waiving his claim of kingship over the Noldor, and says to Fingolfin, "If there lay no grievance between us, Lord, still the kingship would rightfully come to you, the eldest here of the House of Finwë, and not the least wise." But to this, his brothers did not all in their hearts agree. What do you think of that ominous sentence?
It is sad.
Nothing good can come of some of them holding jealousy and bitterness in their hearts. And I think the sad thing is the one who would pay the most for this is Maethros, as his brothers would be sure to revenge themselves upon him, one way or the other, for this.
He already suffered quite a bit.
Oh, but not enough in their eyes. Now, this is not a full chapter. This is more like a few pages, but what do you think of these couple of pages? Action-packed.
There's a lot that goes on.
It's tragic. It's horrifying. It's austere and august and amazing. And of course, if you like chicken, you're also hungry, so that doesn't help. This is some great writing here. There are writers who try their entire lives to write great literature, but never quite make it to this. And it is a breathtakingly tragic couple of pages. And hopefully next time, in terms of our next video of Tolkien, we'll be covering the rest of this chapter, as Thingol makes contact with the House of Finarfin and the House of Feanor, as well as their nature for kind of hiding important details that he should like to know about before he enfeoffs them with huge portions of his land. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button as though you were Morgoth smashing Fingolf into itty-bitty pieces.